It's time for more Manifesting Original Rich Bitch Experiences. Each week, we're talking travel, wellness, and millennial musings with a level of refinement. What level? It fucking depends. I'm your host, Ava Bilkey. Welcome back to another episode of the More Pod. I thought that today it would be fun to do an extended Love It or Leave It, and specifically look at travel trends for 2023 and talk about whether we are loving them or leaving them behind. And in preparing for this episode, I took inspiration from a lot of sources on the internet. One of them being the Amex Global Travel Trends report, which is pretty extensive. Also looked at other sources like Travel and Leisure, Afar, other major travel publications, and then pooled those trends with what I'm seeing in my world. So let's go through these trends. Let's talk about them. I'm super curious to know which of these trends you would like to participate in as a traveler this year and beyond. And also, I'm curious to know if we would leave the same ones behind. So let's get into it. What are some of these travel trends for this year? The first one is called set jetting, otherwise known as TV tourism. And set jetting is traveling to places after seeing them in like a popular show or movie. I think we've seen a lot of examples of this in the last few years. Take, for example, The White Lotus, Emily in Paris, Bridgerton. I feel like these are some of the big ones. And say what you want about Emily in Paris. That show definitely paints a beautiful picture of Paris, and it does make you want to go. Now, I think every time a new season of Emily in Paris drops on Netflix, I notice an uptick in Instagram reels, other travel content, specifically talking about places to go in Paris. And to take it a step further, this set jetting is really like the reels that are talking about all of the set locations. You know, go see Emily's office in real life. Go dine at the restaurant that, oh my God, I can't remember his name, that the hot chef works at, et cetera, et cetera. And while this can be really fun, I do see how it could become a bit limiting in terms of having a well-rounded experience in a city. If you go to Paris and only do the Emily in Paris tour, you're probably going to miss out on quite a lot. However, if you go to Paris and you do a little dabble in Emily in Paris, and you also kind of round that out with other experiences, I think this can be pretty cool. Another big blockbuster show on Netflix in the last few years has been Bridgerton. And while I went to London last summer, and that was not driven by Bridgerton, I will say that I ended up participating in a TV tourism moment in Bath. So I did a long weekend in Bath, which is a couple hours train ride outside of London. And Bath is actually where they film a lot of the movies and TV series that have a British setting. And they're filmed in Bath because Bath is such a beautifully preserved city. And it's obviously a lot less busy than London, for example. So when I was in Bath, I found myself on a Bridgerton walking tour. And I got to see Lady Danbury's house. I got to see the front door of the Featheringtons' houses. I got to see where the Duke makes his first on-screen appearance as he's like riding down that long brick road. I mean, there were lots of places. Oh, and the tea shop. The tea shop is an actual place. There were lots of places that I got to see that were in the series, which I fucking loved. Obsessed with Bridgerton, by the way. And it was fun. However, I didn't go to Bath with that intention. It just happened to be something that I learned about after the fact. But I'm not bashing it. I guess my point is simply that this set jetting or TV tourism, I think can be a lot of fun. And it's a unique experience to have. And I think as long as you are rounding it out with other experiences of the local area, culture, other things to do, I think it's a great option. So I'm going to go with love it. Loving TV tourism. So the next big travel trend right now is luxury cruises, and specifically living on them. Now, if you would have told me 3 years ago that people would be living on cruise ships in 2023, I would not have believed you. I really thought that cruises were going to kind of disappear. I didn't think that cruises would make it past the pandemic. I really didn't. I mean, they were shut down. Some of the first stories, like horror stories of COVID, were like, people trapped on cruise ships that couldn't port anywhere because nobody wanted a ship full of coronavirus. I mean, I really thought that cruises were going to like finally kind of dissipate, but they're not. But to take it a step further, people are now living on cruise ships. So my dad was actually the first person to alert me of this. He had sent me an article last year about this cruise line that you could essentially pay to live on for 3 years. It costs $30,000 a year minimum. I think it can go up to $100K per year depending on what type of suite you book. But 130 countries, 375 ports. It really is a world tour. This one's called Life at Sea. From a financial standpoint, it is sort of an attractive option. 30 grand a year to live in a cruise cabin and have all food included, laundry on site, doctors on board. It seems like a pretty good deal at first glance. The speed at which you port and visit these 130 countries is kind of where I start to wonder. I haven't done the math on it, but if it's like, one day in each port, I just don't know how much you could see of any one place for one day. But I've heard of worse situations, like it would be an interesting life experiment. We'll call it that. They also tout Wi-Fi on board, so this would really take working from anywhere to the next level. They've got the Starlink internet, you're in the middle of the ocean, minding your own business, working remotely, docking a day here, there. I can kind of see it. I can kind of almost see myself living on a cruise ship. And then I remembered. I remembered the one time I went on a cruise. Didn't go so well. I went on a cruise with my family when I was probably 13. And it was a Disney cruise. And we cruised from Miami to the Bahamas. What I remember about the cruise was one, I was like at the worst possible age to be in the situation because I wasn't young enough to enjoy the kids' components of the cruise, but I also wasn't old enough to enjoy the young adults components of the cruise. Like since I was 13, I couldn't go in like the teenagers' pool, for example. On top of that, I remember being very seasick. And I never really got those sea legs or whatever. I never turned into the mermaid required to thrive in a cruise situation. Lots of Dramamine was involved. Um, I also remember like at nighttime, the closet had these rolling doors. And as the ship would kind of like cut through these huge waves, the rolling doors would like roll from one side of the closet and slam. And then we'd tip the other way. And then they'd roll the other way and slam into the other door. It was a nightmare, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know if that's something that you get used to in a cruise situation or not. But what I do know is that committing to 3 years on a ship without being able to test this is not a risk I'm willing to take. I think the luxury cruise live aboard is a no for me. I think we're going to leave it. But I don't know. I mean, that one could go either way. Had I not had a cruise experience that did not go well, you probably could have talked me on to that ship. But let me know what you think about this one. The next trend is wellness vacations. And wellness has been a trending category across the board for many years now. And the wellness business, the industry of wellness, continues to grow. I think wellness fits naturally into the travel sector. Wellness vacations are essentially focusing on less doing and more being. So rather than dropping into New York City and running around, seeing the Lady of Liberty, going to Saturday Night Live, rather than doing that circuit, this is like dropping into a yoga retreat, going to a wellness center, staying at a spa resort, a much more relaxed pace, and really taking a vacation that is based on the goals of rest, relaxation, rejuvenation, all the R's and R's. I love this. I don't know how you could not love a wellness vacation. I think people are much more focused on their overall well-being, their mental health, physical rest. And I did a bit of a wellness vacation recently. Last fall, I stayed at the Two Bunch Palms resort in Palm Desert area of Palm Springs. And my main draw for going there was the natural spring water baths that they had on property. So this property pulls up the spring water into tubs. They have two different kinds of soaking tubs. They have teakwood baths and they have concrete baths. And Not gonna lie, that was 80% of the draw in terms of why I chose to go there. On top of the hot springs soaks, they also had a really cool program built out around wellness. So they have a spa and classes, they had meditations, they had a full moon circle, they had a sound bath. I mean, so you get the idea. A lot of things that I'm interested in, some bougie wellness experiences, and that was probably the closest I've come to feeling relaxed in a very long time. I'm a huge fan of wellness overall, and I think that we could all use a bit more care and attention to our well being. So, this is a love it for me. The next trend is food tourism, essentially planning an entire trip around a food experience, whether that be flying somewhere to dine at a specific restaurant or going somewhere because you are interested in a certain type of cuisine, or having a farm to table dining experience, or taking cooking classes, essentially planning the entire trip around food. This is a really great way to tap into the local experience of the local area that you're in. You know, this is the opposite of dining at McDonald's because you're in a rush, or like grabbing a Starbucks because it's familiar. This is the opposite of that. This looks like flying to Copenhagen to dine at Noma. This looks like visiting Porto in Portugal because you randomly have a love for port wines. This is touring an olive farm in Italy and learning about the production of olive oil. Food tourism is probably one of the most important pieces of travel. You know, if we've learned any one thing from Anthony Bourdain, it's that food is one of the best ways to understand a culture, understand people, understand a community. And I think we can just learn so much by traveling and exploring through the lens of food. For me, I know that food is oftentimes the most memorable part of my travels. That's why I talk a lot about the best places to dine, the worst places to dine when I'm traveling, because for me, when I look at my travel memories, most of them are centered around a meal in some capacity. I have taken a couple of cooking classes, and those have always been really, really fun. One was in Chiang Mai, went to this super cute cooking farm restaurant place and learned how to make green curry. I mean, talk about a once in a lifetime experience. Being in Thailand, making a dish that's origin is Thai, using lemongrass, like learning about the ingredients. It was just so interesting. Have I made it at home? No, I have not. But I don't think that's necessarily the point of cooking classes when you travel. You know, it's not like you're going to learn and memorize a dish so that you can like replicate it when you get home. It's really just more about being in that moment and enjoying going deeper on a subject or a topic while you're there and learning from the locals and just having a greater appreciation also for the food that you're enjoying because you also participated in the making of it. So, food tourism is great. I'm a huge fan of this. This is a love it for me. There are also a lot of ways to do it. But if you're thinking about where you want to travel to and you're interested in, like, maybe your deal breaker or your tiebreaker is a cuisine, right? Like, would you rather go to Mexico and have the best tacos of your life? Or would you rather go to Italy and have the best pasta of your life? Well, if you're gluten free, you might choose Mexico. And there you go. So, taking food into consideration when you travel, I think, is awesome. And it's a love it for me. The next travel trend is glamping/van life. Basically, the illusion of living outside with some of the luxuries of home. Now, glamping, aka glamorous camping, is marketed as camping, but just glamorously. This, for me, doesn't work. I've never been able to grasp it. But I was trying to wrap my head around it for this podcast and find what the appeal of glamping would be. I think the appeal of glamping is that if you want a remote experience, pure isolation, no cell service, maybe you're doing like a serious digital detox and you want to take it to the next level where you're actually staying in a tiny little cabin in the middle of the woods with a 2-burner stove and no shower to just like take it to the next level, perhaps that's the value of glamping. The drawbacks of glamping are that it's still camping. So while you may not have to pitch your own tent or create your own fire, you still have to cook your own hot dogs. You still have to sleep outside-ish. You still have to deal with the lack of freely running filtered water. You still have to deal with not really showering. This confuses me because it feels like a lot of work. And I'm all about hard work, but when it comes to traveling, that should be a time where we take a break from all this hard work. Like, I just really don't understand camp glamping. In the same category of living outside but not really is van life. And van life has been very big over the last few years. Van life is spending time in like a transit van that's been converted into a livable situation. So, just like the tiny cabin or the glamorized tent, you could spend time in a van that doubles as a bed and a kitchen and a makeshift toilet and drive it around. The trouble with van life, even if you're only renting one for a few weeks, is that you still have to deal with the logistics of camping grounds, parking grounds, connecting to water, connecting to electricity. I mean, and then driving the thing, like basically need a separate driver's license for van life. I get why it became so popular, especially when social distancing was like the number one goal in life. But is the work really worth the reward? I'm going to say no. For me, camping, glamping, van lifing is a leave it. I don't think you could ever talk me into camping, but I know a lot of people like this. So you'll have to let me know if you are team glamp or team we don't camp, otherwise known as Meredith Blake. The next travel trend is slow travel. And slow travel is all about taking your time. For my fellow Americans, this means going somewhere for more than 7 days. I think that the ability to work remotely and this whole new generation of digital nomads has contributed greatly to this trend of slower travel. You know, if you are mixing your work life with your travels and you can take your work with you, you can work remotely, you essentially have no timelines. And when you have no timeline, you can truly immerse yourself in a local area, in a community, in a culture, in a country. You can make friends. You can live like a local and start to develop your own routine. And that's one of my favorite things about slower travel. I think it's incredible. I think that we're going to see more of this moving forward as people continue to restructure what their life looks like on a daily basis and, you know, where their income comes from and how they decide to live their lives. I think that this trend of slow travel is truly indicative of where we are heading. It is a rejection of hustle culture, and I'm really excited to watch more people jump on this trend or try it out, especially if you're someone who has never really been on an extended vacation. This is solely an American problem. Anywhere else in the world, going somewhere for 3, 4, 6 weeks, even 8 weeks at a time is not as unusual. Hello, European summers. But it's just so much nicer. You don't have to cram your days. You can take your time. And again, you can really live like a local. And living like a local really feeds into, you know, the concept of travel is less about the destination and more about the journey. I love slow travel. It's a love it for me. And my wish, my hope for everyone is that you get to experience slow travel at least once in your life. Hopefully, much more. But I know for a lot of people, it feels like an impossible feat. The last travel trend is space travel. I get so excited about space travel. I've been reading a lot about space travel previously and in preparation for this podcast, and I find it so fascinating. So, while space travel might seem mostly unlikely right now, I think the thing that's interesting to keep in mind, or more so what's important to keep in mind, is that aviation started out this way too. You know, people weren't just popping off on flights on a regular basis for a while. When plane travel first became popular, it was reserved for the very rich. So keep that in mind as we talk about space travel, because I do think space travel will be something that we will be able to experience in our lifetime. The draw of space travel would be to have the overview effect. to have an existential, transcendental type of experience to essentially alter your consciousness in some way. To be able to have the perspective of planet Earth from a distance would truly be a once in a lifetime, life changing experience. Now, if you have $30 million, you could do this. You could go to zero gravity, astronaut style, with Bezos or Musk or Branson. You could do that. But that's not specifically what interests me. The type of space travel that I'm interested in is a space balloon. It's the slow travel of space travel. Let me explain. So, in my research, I discovered a company called Space Perspective. I think there's a few of them, but this was the one I read the article about. And it's essentially a day trip. Now, you don't go to the zero gravity zone, but you go about 20 miles out away from the Earth. And the distance of that 20 miles gives you the perspective. You can kind of see that ozone layer, if you will, and you can see the curvature of the Earth. So you're much further away than just flight travel, obviously, but you're not going so far as to break that line between what's considered Earth and what's considered space. The space balloon is the day trip of a lifetime. And the way it looks is that you have a capsule that holds 8 people. You float up for 2 hours. You hover for 2 hours. And then you float back down for 2 hours. So it's a 6-hour excursion. And what I like about this is that you're not being jet rocketed out of the planet. You know what I mean? Like, it's a much more gentle ride, and you don't have to do any training in terms of like astronaut training. Like, you don't have to do that. They also are working with a Miami chef to curate the dining experience. So it sounds to me a lot more like a really cool private dinner with views of the Earth. What's the music? What's the vibe? What's on the menu? What's the champagne? Like, this is a moment of celebration. And the space balloon is a rich bitch experience that I personally would love to have. This one is within reach. I'm not saying we'll be able to space balloon tomorrow, but they're currently selling tickets for $125K, which is much more reasonable than 30 million, obviously. And I think this would just be a really cool thing to do with, like, 7 of your best friends. Like, take your own capsule balloon flight, hover 20 miles above the Earth for a few hours. I'm into it. That I would do. I don't think I could go the whole astronaut way. I think that's it's a little aggressive. I don't need that in my life, but I would love to have a nice day trip in the space balloon. So, manifest. I love it. Again, it might sound crazy right now, but in the future, we're all going to be hanging out in these space balloons. I can just see it. So, these are some of the travel trends for 2023. I think that these can be a really fun way to approach travel planning. So, if you've been looking for maybe a new way to travel, or maybe you've been trying to decide on a couple places, perhaps one of these trends can help you plan your next trip. And I'd be curious to know which ones you're loving and which ones you're leaving. I think there's a lot of great stuff here. I mean, I'm loving the set jetting, the wellness, the food tourism, the slow travel, the space travel. There's a lot to love. The cruising and the glamping, though, I'm really on the fence about these. I don't think I can do them. If you feel very strongly that cruising and glamping should be love-its, I'm open to hearing your arguments. I'm not committing to changing my mind, but I am open to hearing them. All right. That's what I've got for today. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would absolutely love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate the time you spend with me every week. If you listen to the pod, I love you. And I'll see you next week. Listen to the More Pod every Wednesday as I share the things that make me more me and discover a thing or two to make you more you.